Now that my dad is in a wheelchair, we've had to remove the coffee table between their sofas so that he can easily get through to his desk on the other side. So now, for those that are using the sofas, this means there's no place to set down a book, or for my mom to put down her whiskey sour. What they need is a coffee table, but not one that will block the way for my father to get through. So I came up with this. It's a typical sofa table, however, I designed it in a way so that its height is completely adjustable. So you can have it off to the side over the sofa arm, reaching over from behind the couch, or just down in front if you'd like. So this is what I'm going to make today. Let's head to the shop. I start out with this large slab of walnut and take a few measurements of where I need to break it down. And then to do that, I just place the slab on a sheet of foam insulation and then use a circular saw to cross-cut off a section. The workpiece then needs to have one edge squared up, so I take care of that with several passes over at the jointer. And then referencing that edge on the table saw fence, I can square up the other sides of the pieces. Now it's time to resaw these slabs, and I do that over at the bandsaw. This took a while to do, but with a nice sharp blade, the cut turned out very clean, and the beauty of the grain really started to be revealed. Then it was over to the thickness planer, and as they got thinner, they really started looking good. Man, makes me think I gotta renew my gym membership. I found some rough sawn ash that I've had for years and figured that it would offer some nice contrast with the walnut. I cut it down to size on the chop saw, jointed the sides, and then glued it up into a panel. Now my planer can only handle boards that are less than 13 inches wide, so I trimmed it down to size so that it would fit. Then by shimming it up on a sled, I was able to flatten one side, and then I flipped it over and flattened the other, and was able to thin it down to just over its final size. Now for the sides of the table, I marked out another piece of walnut that has a transition of sapwood to heartwood. I really like the variety of colors and wanted to highlight that in the piece. Planing that down, and then cutting it in half for the two sides. The table base will be mitered, so I set the saw to 45 degrees and start to cut the angles on all the pieces that will make up the lower section. And here I am, making another walnut jerry curl for my Lionel Richie costume. And now I can cut all the pieces down to their final length and height over at the miter saw. Now I'm ready to drill out the hole in the front that will be for the locking pin. I mark the location and then head over to the hollow chisel mortiser and line up the fence just right. Once it's all set up, I can drill a square hole through the front and then start assembling the base. To do it easily, I lay things out flat and line up each of the pieces. Once everything is in place, I run strips of masking tape over the joints to tie them all together. Then with everything taped up, I gently flip the piece over and apply some glue. Lastly, I just fold it up, tape it closed, and clean up any glue squeeze out on the inside. Now it's time to trim down the slider so it's the correct width for the base. And since it was still a little too fat to fit into its pants, I had to sand off a few pounds using a drum sander until it was a perfect fit. Man, this project is making me feel guilty. Using a pencil, I could trace the hole for the locking pin onto the slider. Then by holding the pencil in and lifting, I can mark where the rest of the holes need to be drilled as well. With all the locations marked, I could use the mortiser and drill out all the adjustment holes. And to dress it up a bit, I decided to add a small chamfer to each of the holes. Since the holes are so small, I had to do this all by hand, so they're not perfect, but I still feel it looks a lot better with them, and it definitely adds the handcrafted feel to the finished piece. Now to attach the top to the slider, I decided to go with a mortise and tenon joint. Here, I'm hogging out all the mortise on the bottom side of the table surface. And then I use the crosscut sled on the table saw to make the tenon on the top of the slider. I knock off the edges of the tenon with a block plane and then give it a test fit. Perfect. A small 1/8 inch roundover bit in the trim router softens the edges. And to remove any burns, I take a few passes with the hand plane. Then it's time for everybody's favorite part of any project, sanding. To fasten the base onto the bottom, I position where I want it and then trace it. This leaves a faint outline of where it needs to be mounted. Now I can drill some mounting holes between the lines. Then from underneath, countersink all the holes I just drilled. Flipping the bottom back over, I can add some glue to the base, carefully place it within the traced lines, put some clamps on, and then secure it firmly using the mounting holes from underneath. Now we can add glue to the tenon and to the mortise, and then put those together. With the glue, it was a real tight fit, and I had to use a mallet to get it to seat properly, but with some elbow grease and some clamps, I was able to get it in there. To make sure it was square, I stretched a band clamp over things and just tightened it down until it was all true. To give the top a bit more support, I figured I should add a couple gussets, so I cut some out of the scraps that I had from before. I cut them down to size, and then I mark out the angle that I want on just one of them. And then by stacking them both up and making them flush, I can cut them both out at once over at the miter saw. I remove the whiskers and the sharp edges over at the sander, and then I could stick them in place. With everything dry, I can put it together for the first time. Now I need to make the locking pin. I chose another ash cutoff from before and cut out a small section. I used a card scraper to remove the bandsaw marks and then sanded the rest of it smooth. Once I had it fitting in the hole, I trimmed it down and added some bevels to accent it a bit. I stole this thing from the Ghostbusters and figured I'd try it out. And with that, we're ready for finish. Man, I love seeing the grain pop out like that. I ended up putting on several coats of satin poly, and I sanded with 220 between applications. Lastly, I added some small rubber feet to the bottom of the table, and then it was finished. Alright, well here it is, all finished, and man oh man, it sure looks really good. I am very pleased with how that turned out. If you would like to build this but are reluctant because Maybe you don't have access to rough sawn lumber. Maybe you don't have the circular saw, the band saw to break it down. Maybe you don't have the thickness planer, the joiner, the chop saw, the mortiser, the drum sander. Maybe you don't have all those tools, and maybe you're a little intimidated or uncomfortable with using mortise and tenon joinery. Don't worry about it, because right now I'm going to build another one in a much more simplified, inexpensive, easy way, only using the table saw. So stay tuned for that. And a drill press. I'm going to use the drill press too. You don't have to use a drill press, but I'm going to use a drill press. As you might have guessed, the first step is just breaking down the 3/4 inch plywood into all the pieces that you'll need. And I chose to use some spacers when gluing up the base so that I could use clamps easily. But also, by putting a couple strips of masking tape on the spacers, it allows for just enough room for the slider piece to move freely once the base is dry. And once it was dry, I could flush up the bottom on the crosscut sled over at the table saw. Test fit. Looks good. Tracing the base onto the bottom. Drilling mounting holes. Countersinking. Gluing on the base. Clamping. And screwing it in. I mark a line where the slider needs to go onto the top. Then I drill a couple pocket holes. By clamping on a scrap board onto the line, I create a fence to attach the slider, and then I fasten that in place. I cut down some scrap pieces to make the gussets. And glue those in on top of the pocket holes to hide them. Marking a location for the locking hole, and drilling that out with a Forstner bit. Tracing the hole, and marking out all the other drill locations. And then I drill those out over at the drill press. And now sliding it into place. Now you could easily just go and buy a dowel to use for a locking pin, but I decided to make my own out of walnut. I heard that the world would burst into flames if walnut ever touched plywood, and I wanted to test that theory, because some people just want to see the world burn. But honestly, you can dress up this table as much or as little as you like. Use some edge banding, stain it, or even slap a couple coats of paint on it. The design is what makes this table great, and it's up to you to make it look however you want. Turned out looking pretty good. Alright, so here's the plywood version. Turned out really nice. It went together very easily, and it operates in exactly the same way. You can pull out this peg, you can lift up on the slider, and you can lock it in at whatever height you need for your sofa or chair or wherever you're going to put this thing. So if you'd like to build this, I will have plans available on my website, so be sure to go check those out. And in the meantime, let's go give the other one to my parents.
Oh, I love it. That's perfect.
So you're right, this is all walnut, and what I did is I wanted to capture kind of the sapwood on both sides of the slab so that you get that beautiful transition. And there's even a tiny bit of the live edge right there, which I thought added a little bit of character. But the beauty of this is that it is completely adjustable to whatever height you want. So if you want it here in front of the couch, you can at this height. Or if you want to put it on the side and bring it up even higher, you just pull this pin out, and then you can bring it up to whatever height you want and then slide the pin back in. So now it would be high enough to put it on the edge.
Sure.
So you can always maintain this room for Dad to get through, and you can put it wherever. It'll even go high enough where you could put it behind the couch and have it sticking over the front. Wow. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. You like it?
Wow. It's great.
Yeah. All right.
It's fantastic.
frame? I am. Okay, hit it. Jeez, so squeaky. It's like it's possessed by a giant flock of angry parakeets. Gotta get some oil. Depending on the size of your sofa or table. This is the table. I'm gonna put a table on the table. Lift up the slider and you can make adjustments. Oh my gosh. Words are hard. Alright, so here's the plywood version, and yep, there it is. So as I was planing this down, these holes started to appear, and you can see that there's something in there, and as I was digging it out, you can see that it's like wet and slimy, and I don't know what this was. I mean, this wood has been drying in a barn for years and years and years. So I have no idea what that is. And then, you know, just the same sort of thing started to come through on the other side. And if we dig them out, they look to be like little eggs or something. So I'm wondering if there were bugs that were in there that laid some eggs, and then eventually the tree grew around them, and I don't know, just kind of encapsulated them in there, and they could never dry out. I thought that was amazing. But if you know what that is, comment down below, because I have no idea if that was like an egg or some kind of bug carcass, but I would have figured the bug would have dried out, but these didn't dry out for years. Interesting.